Hi, everyone. Jorhena Thomas here with Girl Security. Thank you for joining us for this session of I Didn't Know That Was a Job. Today, I have the pleasure of being here with Bilva Chandra. Hi, Bilva. And we're going to talk a little bit about Bilva's path and the cool work that she does. And at the end of this, you're probably going to say to yourself, I didn't know that was a job. So Bilva's been in this space for a while, and she's operating at the intersection of technology policy, societal impacts, and national security. And she does some really cool work, and we're just going to talk a little bit about that with her today. So Bilva, let me start off real quick and ask you if you can just tell us about what you do and what you have done in your career.
For sure. Super excited to be here and to chat with you today and to all the folks watching. So, I am currently a senior AI policy advisor at the National Institute of Standards and Technology at the Department of Commerce. Very long title. The TLDR of that is that I do AI policy work for the US government, particularly within commerce. And a lot of my work is focused on synthetic content or AI generated content and reducing risks and mitigating risks from synthetic content. Which is super exciting. I think we're in a really momentous time period right now to build guardrails for AI widely, particularly generative AI and beyond. And at the same time, thinking about how do we manage risks from these AI systems in order to empower innovation, which I think is really crucial. Thinking of guardrails and risk management is actually a way to empower innovation. So that's how I would describe my current job as of now. But I have a long background of looking at issues at the intersection of technology and policy, which I'm more than happy to talk about through this interview.
Thank you, Bilva. So let's talk a little bit about your path to this space, because certainly you didn't leave high school or college, maybe saying, this is what I want to do. I want to work at the intersection of all these happening issues. So how did you get here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I certainly did not plan it. And generally, for those in the audience watching, I think it's completely fine to change your mind and to pivot throughout your career. I actually think that it's important to do so as you make new discoveries about what you want, what you care about, what's impactful to you. When I was in college, actually, I was studying terrorism. So I was very focused on terrorism, radicalization, topics such as martyrdom, what empowers somebody to radicalize and join a terrorist organization, which is super interesting. I am still very much interested in those topics, and violent extremism as well. And so that was my foundation. And I became more and more interested with how different types of malicious actors were using, and I should say abusing, the internet and various different platform ecosystems, and how they're able to use these different platforms in order to empower their operations, to recruit individuals, to radicalize people who are at risk, particularly youth in certain communities. And so I became more and more interested about how the internet works. How can it empower malicious actors and malicious behavior, and how can it be exploited to do bad stuff, quite frankly? And so I started to move away from just the cookie cutter terrorist organizations that I was focusing on, and started becoming more and more interested into like broader social movements on the internet, or like diffused organizations, people who believe in conspiracy theories, mis and disinformation, and just wider internet communities, and how much influence the internet actually has on individuals, and how it can be weaponized essentially, particularly in the disinformation space. So very interesting background, really much started in CT, went closer and closer towards the disinformation space, internet exploitation. And after I left the security studies program at Georgetown, Hoya Saxa, I realized I really wanted to work on trust and safety related issues. So I could be working at the platforms where all of the problems actually happened, and be empowered to take down coordinated influence operations networks, for example, rather than just being on the outside researching and thinking about what's happening on the inside of these companies. So for that reason, I left. After I finished Georgetown, I decided to go into the tech sector, more specifically at LinkedIn, where I was a cyber threat intelligence analyst focused on influence operations and disinformation. So I got to fight the bad guys right where they were and take down a bunch of networks. And I specialized at the time in LinkedIn's China portfolio, spent a lot of time working on Latin American countries, South Asian countries as well, which was super interesting. And yeah, so that was the direct operationalization of all of the research topics and areas that I was the most interested in, except I got to be the analyst, taking down all these networks, investigating these actors, understanding their tactics, techniques, and procedures. And I found that super fascinating. But you might be wondering, how did that lead to what I do now, working for the US government on AI policy, which I don't think there's a long bridge to where I am now compared to where I was before. But during my time there, I essentially realized that I really wanted to work on policy issues instead of being an analyst or an investigator. And I cared about that from a disinformation point of view, but I also was getting increasingly concerned about the use of artificial intelligence, which is something I studied quite a bit in grad school, AI and national security. And so I was thinking more and more about that and how particularly AI could be weaponized in influence operations and in disinformation networks. And so with that, I decided to kind of take a career pivot to an extent, and I ended up finding a job at OpenAI, which at the time I joined, it was 2 weeks before ChatGPT launched. So practically another era compared to the world that we're living in today. And that was a remarkably different experience than I had at any other company. And I was doing work that I had never really done before and just hitting the ground running. So at OpenAI, I was on their trust and safety team, where I led product safety efforts for DALL-E, which is, as many of you may know, an image generation tool that does text to image generation now at OpenAI. And so I've focused on all sorts of thorny, difficult policy questions, as well as operational questions about how to scale content moderation across the product. How do you write different kinds of content policies for a model itself versus writing it for a human to train machine learning classifiers? So it was far more technical than what I was used to, and was a really awesome learning experience for me to dive deeply into an AI product. And so that's how I kind of became an AI person, so to speak, by that experience working there. And since then, I've been predominantly working on AI policy issues. After I left OpenAI, I really wanted to have lots of intellectual freedom and go back to my academic roots. I was really missing being in grad school. So I became an AI policy fellow at the Rand Corporation, where I just got to sit and think and write a ton, put out a lot of published works on these various topics that I'm incredibly passionate about, talk to folks in Congress about these issues, go to events, go on speaking panels. And so that was awesome. So I was briefly a fellow at Rand while I was waiting for the federal agency process to come through for me to start a role in the US government. And now I'm here. And I think that right now is a phenomenal time to be doing this work, particularly in the public sector and in civil society. I think young talent especially is very, very much needed in the US government. Me having been young talent in the US government just starting 6 months ago. And so I'm super, super excited to have more people like me and have a more diverse workplace in the public sector, and for more young people to be interested, I think, in these issues. And I don't think the path has to be It's not cookie cutter, right? There's no one particular path to doing this work. I know AI policy can seem very intimidating, right? It can seem like you need to be the most like technically experienced individual on the planet. But I can guarantee you, I don't code. I have no intention of ever coding in my life. I don't enjoy it, and I'm a policy person at my core, and I'm a translator between technical and non-technical audiences, and that is a superpower that not a lot of people have. So this is just a maybe inspiration for people, especially those who think that they don't have comp sci background, so they can't do this work. There's definitely room and space to do this work.
Thank you, Bilva. You shared a lot of good info there. And I'm particularly impressed with the way that you just kind of let your interests flow. So you started with counterterrorism work, and then you let that flow into the mis and disinformation and how information was abused on the internet. And you just kind of followed your interest. And in every step of the way, there was some interesting piece of the work for you to do. So I think that is so amazing. But I do, before we go, want to ask you if there are any challenges that you had to navigate, or if you had any advice that you would tell to your younger self, maybe in this last few seconds that you want to share.
Definitely. And I can make it super quick. I think the first piece of advice would be to build a personal brand. That has been incredibly important to my career and has also enabled me and helped me to pivot when I need to. Just my presence, my publications, the people that I've interacted with, building a community of supporters around you professionally, people who can be sponsors for you in future roles, people who can mentor you externally. So, not even in the company or the place that you work at, but rather people who will uplift you from the outside, and having that on the inside, I think is super important. And then just building your own brand, like thinking about what are all the topics that you really care about, and sitting and writing about it, and getting people who are more experienced than you, that have done similar things before, to read it over, give you edits, help you get published, I think is very important, especially for girls and women in the security space, to really get our names out there. And then the second thing I would say is kind of be willing to be flexible. And I'm an incredibly type A person, so it's actually quite difficult for me to do that for myself. But I think what I realized is, like, as long as you really care about your work, you're in being intentional about your career, and you have broader values about the kind of work that you want to do, then I think that, you can easily pivot, you can be flexible, you can build your personal brand. You don't have to stress too much about that. It's more about what are you trying to achieve in the long term, and that's less of a specific task and more of like principles, right? So for me, it's having impact, doing work that actually helps people, being at the intersection of technology and policy. I know I'm never going to leave that space. Those two things are important to me. And then having a community of supporters to uplift me, people that I can uplift. Part of the reason why I joined this organization as a mentor is also really, really important. So having that flexibility and making sure that you're building community around you, you're being less flexible with your principles, but more flexible with like your tactics and where you take your career.
That is excellent. Two excellent pieces of advice. And I would venture to say that most people who have these very interesting jobs that people don't even know exist follow those principles. They know where their intersecting interests and skills are, and they follow them, and they create their own brand, and find themselves in interesting jobs. So thank you so much, Bilva. I think you've shared so many interesting pieces of information with us today, and we really appreciate your time.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye. Bye.